Yes, forecast. So we potentially have quite a nice week actually. And we do have to pay attention to a few details to hopefully get a nice week as well. Where here on the dollar, if we look at the weekly, and it's quite important actually, let's first go to the monthly. I want to see where the monthly wants to close this week. That is quite important to me because let's say we get a huge rejection all of a sudden and we reject above or at least inside that fair value gap right there, and we close inside that fair value gap. Then, oh, excuse me. Then that tells me right there that we might actually want to continue higher even. So that is a very small detail that we have to pay attention to. Overall, again, I do think that we still can continue lower here. Now, how can we continue lower? If we look at the weekly, we have this weekly fair value gap sitting right there. So that weekly fair value gap is quite interesting in itself. Will we trade into that weekly fair value gap already this week? That is something that we have to pay attention to. And how can we know that? Because currently, again, if we remove everything here, we are currently just in between this premium array on the weekly and that discount array. So either, very clearly, we will deliver into that discount array first, or we will first deliver into that premium array. If we first deliver into this discount array, then I think afterwards we are going to come into the weekly fair value gap, if even at all we're going to come into the weekly fair value gap. If we first deliver into the weekly fair value gap right there, then I think we're going to head towards the discount array. So the reason I say that is because on a daily time frame and on all the time, it's not super clear. As in, we're not hovering somewhere right here to then sting into the weekly fair value gap to then continue lower. No, we're quite low already, and we are already continuing lower by the looks of it off of this order flow lag that we're seeing right there. So if this now already creates a new daily fair value gap lower right there, I would like my chances of taking a trade right there already taking a short towards these lows right there and ultimately that weekly low as well. So that is something to take into account. Now, again, this is where the details very much comes in. So if this is your first time doing something like this, where you now need to pay attention to the real details, as in, are we following through or not? And if we're not following through and we're not creating this daily fair value gap right there, for example, then the argument can be made, all right, we are definitely or potentially delivering into that weekly fair value gap first to then continue lower. So if we do not create that daily fair value gap, then I would say weekly fair value gap. But right here, we need to pay attention to the details. Are we following through? Is there confirmation on lower time frame already to continue lower? All those small details become very, very important here. So it's a great practice week as well. Overall, once we get the right price action, this can be a very nice week as well, because we do have quite a few pairs that are quite nice. Then that is definitely what I'm looking at. If we create the daily fair value gap, I'm interested in looking already at shorts on Tuesday. Then on ES, we are seeing the same thing. Now, ES right here is can deliver into the weekly fair value gap. That's the same for NASDAQ and YM. But YM is a little bit too far from the weekly fair value gap for my liking. So I would prefer, again, a daily fair value gap right there to potentially trade into to continue higher. NASDAQ is where I would prefer the weekly fair value gap almost. So here, the weekly fair value gap is definitely something I would look to trade towards and look to trade off of potentially to continue higher overall. And that's the same for ES right there. Where ES, it's a little bit in between. We can create a new daily fair value gap, new 4-hour fair value gap higher instead of coming into the weekly fair value gap. So there's also something to take into account right there. It's more so reading on what happens throughout the week right there. Playing around with that weekly fair value gap. Do we already want to continue higher? Do we want to trade towards it? That's something that the 1 hour, the 4-hour fair value gaps will tell you, of course. So then if we look at DAX, the drawn liquidity is extremely clear. It's, of course, this high that is sitting right there. That is something we're going to deliver into, most likely. And right now, any discount array, that is what you can be a part of. Even afterwards, potentially the weekly fair value gap. But again, that weekly fair value gap is quite far, right? Or, well, actually, zoomed in was quite far. But if we zoom out like this, then relatively seen, it's not that far. So if we can deliver into that, and it also depends quite a lot on the indices, on what the dollar wants to do. If the dollar wants to deliver into the weekly fair value gap, we will have a very clear view on what the indices also wants to do. So right here, this is where we can potentially look to deliver into the weekly fair value gap. It's not 100% certain though. That's what I'm trying to tell you here. All right, Australian dollar, US dollar. Now, currently we have had the expansion phase of the weekly VWAP gap. We can now look to potentially create a weekly VWAP gap next week, which would mean that we should not come back towards this high right there, because that creates a bullish weekly VWAP gap. We have a weekly VWAP gap sitting right there as well, which we can target overall. Right now, I would say this is the easier target right there. It's a nice target for the week. So overall, I would want to see a daily VWAP gap being created right there to then continue higher off of that. Potentially even already 4 hour VWAP gaps right there to continue higher off of that, because we do have Australian dollar and US dollar news on Monday already. So that could already be quite interesting right there to continue higher off of that. So it's definitely something I'm adding to the list. Then EU right here. EU, we have the weekly VWAP gap again. We also have the next target. Let me actually mark that out. The next target is this on the weekly time frame on EU. And on the daily time frame, we are potentially creating a daily VWAP gap higher. Again, it's the same story as on the dollar. If we create that daily VWAP gap higher, I would want to trade off of that. If not, then I'm waiting for the weekly VWAP gap, and in the meantime, doing nothing really. So here, I'm adding it to the waiting list more so than currently already active. GU. Now, GU I quite like, and the reason for that is because on the weekly right here, we're just continuing higher overall towards new highs. And right there, we can have that one as target. Then on the daily time frame, what are we doing? We are just continuing this order flow, right? We have this bullish leg higher, where if we understand this VWAP gap is creating that new VWAP gap, then this new VWAP gap is something I would like to trade off of. And the reason for that is as well because the weekly VWAP gap that we're having right there is sort of out of the conversation for me. As in, if we do come into that, yes, I'm still bullish. I still want to see higher prices. But I would not expect the next candle right there to come all the way back right there to then continue higher. Maybe the next few candles, if this next week is failing to expand higher, is failing to follow through higher. But this weekly VWAP gap is quite far away. So here I would prefer the daily VWAP gap, daily order block potentially, to continue higher off of that. If those do not follow through, then I would say, all right, we are likely trading into the weekly VWAP gap. So it's again, it's the reading. It's a little bit more difficult. It's the reading. Still on the waiting list right there. Then for New Zealand dollar, US dollar. So here we have a full story with these lines right there. And on the weekly time frame, we can see that we are again potentially creating that weekly VWAP gap. So I would mark out this high right there to say, if there is intention, then we should just continue higher and we should create that weekly VWAP gap right there. If you do not do that, then that clearly tells me, all right, there's a lack of intention. So if we understand that and we want to keep on continuing higher, then we should create a daily VWAP gap higher right there and go higher off the daily VWAP gap, which means there's no reason to come back to this line right there. Absolutely zero reason. So there's no reason to come back into the order block as well. So right there, if we create that daily VWAP gap, I would like to see higher prices off of that already. So that is also quite interesting for Tuesday, potentially. Then USD Canadian dollar is what I'm not really interested in. We have the weekly drawn liquidity right there. Again, that's pretty clear, but overall the delivery towards it, where we also have this weekly right there, the low right there, the weekly low, but that's a VWAP gap high potentially, where that is something we can trade back into. That doesn't really show the intention then. So overall, we don't really have a daily VWAP gap, not a clear one. If we make one, it's potentially quite a small one. If we do create it, it could be interesting overall, but I do prefer the other pairs that we've already talked about. So again, bearish, potentially the premium ray, something we will go over as well on Tuesday, potentially. USD CHF. So I have an alert set right there, because if this comes into that weekly VWAP gap right there, then I am quite interested. Then I am quite interested in that right there, and that would be quite interesting. So that could be quite nice. Again, if the dollar already continues lower, then the chances of that coming into the weekly VWAP gap are of course diminished, but it could be quite nice if it does do that. So again, also on the waiting list. USD JPY right here is not something I am really interested in. And the reason for that is the whole story behind that broker part, as in, did we really sweep that low? Did we not sweep it? Did we come above it? It's quite important to understand. So when you have this and we don't really sweep it, or we do sweep it, It's like, all right, then what did we really do? So right here, we also have this bullish rejection right there, which just creates that ST overall, which is almost, it's very 50-50 price action here. So this would not even be on the waiting list for me. It would not be interesting at all for me right here. So silver is quite interesting. We're coming off those daily fair value gaps. We are creating new daily fair value gaps higher potentially. We have the expansion phase of that new daily fair value gap. So if we can get involved of the new daily fair value gap to target the next targets right there, then that is definitely looking quite interesting as well. Definitely looking nice. All right, then we have gold, and gold right here is a little bit more difficult, although it's quite nice overall. It's a little bit more difficult, is that we have the daily fair value gap that's sitting right there. Now, we are already creating potentially a new daily fair value gap already. So I would not expect a daily fair value gap, or I would not expect a move back into this daily fair value gap. If anything, I would want to see, again, currently just higher prices already towards those highs. So a 4-hour fair value gap even, which we're not really creating right there, because that is, again, a fair value gap that's quite low. I would want to see fast price action right now, where it's just expanding higher right there with very little retracements. That's what I would want to see. If we can create a daily fair value gap with Monday being consolidation, then that could be interesting, potentially, to continue higher. But I would prefer silver here. It is potentially quite interesting, though. I would not put it at the top of my interest list. So Bitcoin right here is just really not that interesting. It's again consolidating overall, just really not that interesting. If we want to, then we can do something like this to then continue higher overall. So that could potentially be quite interesting if that happens. But in the meantime, it's just waiting really. If again we create this monthly fair value gap that's sitting right there, then it's the same story, right? If we come into that, then we can continue higher off of that, which could definitely be quite interesting. All right. Crude oil. What happened here? What happened? Let me see. All right. We had this monthly fair value gap right there. Here, it's waiting for me. It's waiting for a daily fair value gap higher or lower to get a clear indication again of what it potentially wants to do. So here it's purely just waiting for me, and nothing much to add onto it. I like the idea of higher prices, but currently I don't want to force that idea anymore, because clearly we are not respecting that fair value gap. So here I just want to wait. I want to wait a little bit longer to get a clear indication again. Nifty, we can look to target higher, of course. And we currently have this breaker that is overlapping with this fair value gap. So if we can if we can deliver into that weekly fair value gap, then I would definitely look to long that right there to continue higher overall. That is quite nice. That is quite nice. So all right, so Nifty can continue higher off of here. And what I want to touch on before we go into the crosses is that now we need to understand in which phase the US dollar pairs mainly are. So this is what we've touched on before as well a little bit, right? Where last week they were in a phase, all right, we can potentially look to trade, but it's not super high probability. Now we're almost transferring towards that high probability condition again if a certain thing agrees. So it's almost, again, it's very beautifully seen. If you observe the forecast, etc., I believe you can very well see that certain weeks we just don't really have a lot to talk about. Then we transfer to that stage where it's almost time to do a lot of things if we agree with one certain thing. And then after that, it's like we can capitalize on it, and the whole week we just have great opportunities everywhere. And afterward, that it turns to shit again, basically. So that is the beautiful 5 stages of probability that we can also see. So that is very nice, and pay attention to that a lot, because that is very important in your trading as well. So here the crosses, if we take a look at Australian dollar, Canadian dollar first, then we do have a weekly fair value gap right there, which we can continue higher off of. And I'm going to add it to the list, but the drawn liquidity is still clear. I'm adding all the good things first, but overall, I do not really like this formation, as in this formation to then come into the weekly fair value gap right there, to then continue higher, can definitely happen, definitely. But it's a quite odd rejection that we're getting right there to then come into the weekly fair value gap to then continue higher. if that makes sense. Just visually, it's not really clean. Where if we mark out the weekly Verwijt gap right there, we can definitely look to continue higher off of that next week, potentially. So overall, again, could be quite nice. I'm definitely going to add it to the long list right there. Then Australian dollar CHF. Let's see. So this is quite interesting right now. Last week we talked about this is quite 50-50. Now right here, since we already offered fair value in this daily Verwijt gap right there, all right, now I do think that we want to continue higher towards this high right there. So a daily Verwijt gap higher to continue higher can be quite nice for sure. Australian dollar JPY right here. Let's see, what is it doing? What is it doing? We have the weekly Verwijt gap, but that's very far. Daily is coming into the daily highs, overlapping with the Verwijt gaps. All right, quite interesting. If we can create a daily Verwijt gap higher with just into a daily Verwijt gap higher, even create one right there on Monday potentially, or just 4 hour already, could be quite interesting to then continue higher. It's also really interesting right here, Australian dollar JPY. Towards, of course, this high right there. Very easy target, this high, and then eventually that high as well. Australian dollar, New Zealand dollar. All right, this is definitely something I am not interested in at all. And on a weekly, we can see we're not following through on those weekly Verwijt gaps higher. And on the daily, we can also see that it's very messy, not creating daily Verwijt gaps or anything. So I do not want to get involved here. Very 50-50. Canadian dollar CHF. Let's see. Yes, this is quite interesting. So the monthly finally followed through right there. Basically, not the cleanest, but it did take monthly context right there. So on a weekly right now, we have new weekly context. So right there, we can look to continue lower off of that. It's also really, really nice potentially. Then Canadian dollar JPY. Let's see. Monthly, weekly. Weekly is sweeping this low. All right, we are sweeping that low right there. Now, this is where on the daily time frame, we have this daily Verwijt gap higher right there. And we can potentially create this new daily Verwijt gap higher there as well. If we get that, could be very interesting for longs. Overall though, we have been in seek and destroy. And the reason I mentioned that is because this could just be a sweep like this sweep to then return back into seek and destroy conditions right there. So would I prefer this over another pair? No, definitely not. But this is quite interesting if we do want to eventually follow through. So I'm definitely going to add it to the list. Would not be at the top of the interest list though. CHF JPY right here. Weekly Verwijt gap right there getting respected. We continue higher off of that. Daily Verwijt gap, if we can deliver into that, would be absolutely beautiful to continue higher as well. The 4 hour, nothing much just yet. So I would mainly wait for the daily Verwijt gap if we want to deliver into that. If we do not want to, then I would look for higher prices on 4 hour daily, etc. on new Verwijt gaps being created. But this is also really, really interesting. Euro Australian dollar right here. I do not like this one, and I'll quickly go over it right here. Monthly, consolidating. Weekly, consolidating right here. No Verwijt gaps or anything. Daily, consolidating right there. The only drawn liquidity I can see is this daily Verwijt gap right there. It's the only thing. On the 4 hour right here, consolidating. So it's just all consolidation to me, and I don't like it. It's very 50-50 price action. Would definitely not be interested in this week. Euro Canadian dollar right here. Euro Canadian dollar as the monthly Verwijt gap higher right there. All right, then at least the expansion phase of the month Verwijt gap higher, right? So if it wants to continue higher, it will definitely create a month Verwijt gap as well after next month. So that could be quite interesting in 2024 already. That's crazy. So on the weekly right here, we are creating this weekly Verwijt gap. We have the weekly Verwijt gap, which if we come into that, I am definitely interested to look for longs. So this is, again, very, very nice, looking very nice right there. Euro CHF. So Euro CHF, let's look at the monthly first. That monthly could be target, the monthly swing high. So on a weekly, we had this weekly Verwijt gap right there, which it doesn't seem like we want to deliver into right now. It's very weird price action overall right here. If anything, I would definitely want to still look at longs. If we can get daily Verwijt gap higher, it could be quite interesting overall. But with all the pairs that we have already selected currently, there is just higher probability pairs out there right now. So I'm going to add it to the waiting list, but I can confidently say that I'm not going to trade this week. And the reason for that is because something like Euro Canadian dollar is already so much more high probability right here. It's way higher probability. It's just super clean. Euro GBP. All right, we're getting a rejection again, lower. Quite interesting. Let's see. Did we get the rejection off of that daily? We did not reach it, I think. No, fell just short of it. All right. So here, again, we need to sort of understand that the weekly right here, weekly value gap is not creating a new weekly value gap higher. It's quite interesting because then we have this disrespect boundary again. The disrespect boundary to potentially take shorts. So 4-hour value gaps, daily value gaps lower right here are very interesting. This daily value gap is not interesting. As in, this is not something I would want to see a retracement to right there to then continue lower. That is too big of a retracement to happen. But here on the 4-hour though, I would definitely be interested already potentially on Monday to look to continue the trend towards those lows right there. So the 4-hour attracts my interest a little bit more than the daily right here, because the daily might not get traded back into that daily value gap before we actually continue lower already. All right, then Euro JPY. Let's see. Inside the weekly value gap, actually. All right, that's quite interesting. We can look to continue higher off of that. Then if we do continue higher off of that, let's see what we are doing. This high as a target right there. Daily fair value gap potentially in the making as well. So I would definitely be interested in a daily fair value gap to look to continue higher off of that. This is also looking quite interesting. There's a lot of potential pairs right here that are interesting. Now, when this does happen, just to quickly address that as well, when this does happen and there are a lot of pairs that are really interesting, then we need to be very picky. We need to be very picky about which one we actually want to trade. So again, that's what we'll go over with the interest list as well. Euro New Zealand dollar right here. For the highs, swept those highs right there, potentially continuing lower, not creating daily fair value gaps lower. So overall, just not really interesting. There are higher probability pairs out there. GBP Australian dollar, already from the daily, I can tell I do not want to trade this. So I'll also go ahead and just skip it. And that's also the reason, because we have quite a lot of pairs currently already to deal with. So we can sort of make it a little bit faster, a little bit easier for ourselves to when we already see price action like this, I already know, yes, I don't like this. It's as easy as that. So I'm going to skip this pair right here. GBP Canadian dollar. We have the weekly fair value gap that we can potentially continue higher off of right there. Now, it's quite far away, as in if the daily fair value gap gets respected right there with the daily order block, then we can continue higher off of that. But we also have the weekly fair value gap right there. So it's a little bit iffy. It's a little bit iffy right there, and I will put it on the waiting list. If we do deliver into the weekly value gap, could be quite nice. If we already create a daily value gap higher, which currently does not seem like it wants to do though, then we can look to trade that. So currently on the waiting list. GBP JPY. Yeah, so we had a beautiful week last week here on GBP JPY, where we are following through on the weekly context higher right there. On the daily time frame, we can now look to create new context with daily fair value gap, with that overlapping high right there, to create that new context right there to continue higher off of that. That is also quite interesting. Definitely going to add it to the list. GBP New Zealand dollar, daily time frame, look at this price action. Not interesting at all. Don't want to trade it. New Zealand dollar CHF. Weekly fair value gap, where we can, the drawn liquidity is quite clear. As in, that high is likely drawn liquidity. Potentially even after that high right there. So that is quite nice. If we can look to deliver higher off of that, and of this daily fair value gap right there that we are potentially creating, that could also be quite nice. So I am going to add it to the list. New Zealand dollar JPY. Let's see. On the weekly time frame, we did not come into the weekly fair value gap. We are already continuing higher by the looks of it. Daily fair value gap higher to continue towards that high could be quite nice. Since we did not come into the weekly fair value gap, I would prefer other pairs. For example, GBP JPY, which did come into the weekly fair value gap right there. Or another one, Euro GBP. No, which one was it? Euro JPY right here. I would prefer a daily value gap that is in context of the weekly right there. This one isn't in context. So I'm going to add it to the list, but would not be at the top of my interest list. So we can see we have quite the pairs. We have quite a lot of pairs. Canadian dollar CHF and Euro GBP. Euro GBP is definitely at the top of my interest list right here. So there's no real discussion about it. It's the weekly value gap that is just way clearer and way more clear than Euro GBP. On the long list, we have quite a lot to deal with here. And let me go over this. Australian dollar, US dollar. The 4-hour value gap could be nice, but with the dollar a little bit unclear. All right, yes, so my computer just turned off, but I believe we were talking about Australian dollar CHF right here. And this would not be at the top of my interest list. The Australian dollar JPY, let's take a look at this. This as well would not be at the top of my interest list. And again, it's the same reason. It's not really coming off of a weekly value gap or anything. But although it is quite clear, it is quite nice overall. And I do still think the daily value gap higher that can be created right there can deliver price higher even on the 4-hour already with Australian dollar news on Monday. Could be quite interesting already. So it will be high, currently at the top, but not at the end of this video. It won't be at the top. Canadian dollar JPY. This again will not be really high. And again, overall, the idea is quite nice. We are potentially confirming order flow, etc. But it's just, it was already in seek and destroy. So what is the reason right now on why it wouldn't be in seek and destroy anymore? That could be because of order flow, because this is the first time that we actually confirm order flow. But overall, I do not want to trust it straight away. CHF JPY. So here we have the weekly value gap. We have the daily value gap right there. This is definitely going to be very high on my interest list right there. The only reason why it would not be on the top is because this retracement to make right there would need to happen pretty fast. And I'm just wondering why it didn't do that on Friday just yet, or why it's waiting for that next week. That's the only thing that's not really clean to me. But other than that, it's very nice. Euro Canadian dollar was, yes, Euro Canadian dollar. So let's see. On the weekly, this is extremely beautiful price action right here currently. So this is going at the top of my interest list right there. There's no real bearish arguments to make. So this is very, very nice. Then Euro JPY, I'm getting a bit lost in the own Euro JPY. Yes, Euro JPY. So here, coming off the weekly value gap, as well with a potentially daily value gap higher, is definitely at a very high place in the interest list right there. Then New Zealand dollar, sorry, GBP JPY. All right, so here, since we already took context, we took weekly context, we have daily context right there, potentially in the making. This can be quite nice, but with taking into account on a monthly time frame, we are creating the expansion phase of the value gap. So in the next few days, we are creating the next monthly candle, which might not want to follow through. So yes, this will be high, but overall, I'm preferring the ones that have not taken a draw on liquidity just yet, where this has taken a draw on liquidity already. New Zealand dollar, yes, New Zealand dollar CHF. This is not really high at the interest list, and main reason being is again, yes, overall it's nice, but it's taking its very, very long time to actually deliver towards the highs right there. So overall, it's not at the top of my interest list. New Zealand dollar JPY, we did not come into the weekly value gap right there. So it's just daily context. Can be nice, but would not be at the top of my interest list as well. So mainly the important part to understand is that I'm mainly interested in Euro Canadian dollar, Euro JPY, GBP JPY right there, Australian dollar JPY, and CHF JPY. They are of my main interest at the beginning of the week, depending on what news also wants to do. And then later on, we'll add probably some pairs from the waiting list onto the interest list as well. All right, perfect. Thank you.